When Emperor Palpatine declared the foundation of the New Order, it drastically changed the entire galaxy. Sure, the Galactic Empire had its roots in the Galactic Republic and even shared some similarities, but these were two entirely different government systems. The Republic was a massive organization where most of the power lay in the Senate, and so bureaucracy and red tape was everything. Only those who could navigate the complexities of this system could be successful. The Empire, on the other hand, had a much more powerful central government controlled from the executive branch. One of Palpatine's main goals was to build a strong and permanent military-industrial complex that could supply his new massive Imperial military on the cheap. Overnight, the Imperial government became the largest employer in the entire galaxy, pushing aside other professions and industries, sometimes in extremely disruptive ways. The point is, if you were alive during this period of time, whether you're a moisture farmer on Tatooine or a street urchin on the streets of Coronet City, there's a good chance you'll end up serving in the Empire. On our channel, we have a really sacred duty, and that is to inform our viewers of the many pitfalls and dangers that lay waiting for them in the Star Wars galaxy. And so today, we're going to talk about some of the worst jobs you could possibly have when you join the Imperial military. You're going to want to avoid these at all costs. If you were posted on the first Death Star, it most likely meant that you were at the top of your industry in whatever military career path you went on since leaving the academy. The TIE fighters stationed on board, the engineers, technicians, the gunners, and even the janitors are selected because of their high quality and skill. But by far the most stressful, and in my opinion one of the worst jobs one could have in the entire Imperial military, was being a part of the Super Laser's gunner crew. Gunner crews on Death Stars were made up of two different groups, either very skilled veteran gunners and new recruits within the Imperial Navy's piloting program. The 168 gunners in charge of firing the Super Laser were supposed to be considered the best of the best. The thing is, these gunners were fully aware of what their Super Laser was capable of. And so there was a great deal of hesitancy and reluctance to actually serve in this unit and carry out one's duties. I mean, maybe the destruction of Jedha City, which is full of insurgents who targeted Imperials, won't weigh down on the conscience of these gunners. But what about the destruction of the Imperial Archives and the military base on Scarif? Surely that caused some uneasy feelings to grow amongst the ranks. To make matters worse, you had the higher-ups breathing down your neck like Moff Wilhuff Tarkin. Now, during one test firing sequence, the simulation was terminated, which drew a lot of anger from Wilhuff Tarkin. He ends up lining up the entire gunner squad and then gives them a stern warning. If they hesitated during an actual battle situation where the Super Laser had to be fired, that would be completely unacceptable. Tarkin would end his lecture by saying that anyone who is not fit for this job should self-report to decommissioning, or they would be shipped off to work at a penal colony. Now, during the destruction of Alderaan, it seemed like the gunner squad did its job correctly. The planet disappeared in a mining accident. Clearly, those Imperial gunners feared Tarkin much more than they feared the consequences of killing 1 billion innocent beings. But after the incident, Tarkin revealed that he placed biomarkers on all of the gunners during the operation. He actually detected that several Imperials had hesitated during the mission during key moments. Of course, they didn't show visible hesitation. Any doubts they had were limited to their minds, but Tarkin was the type of meticulous and obsessed psychopath who really cared about what his underlings were thinking. And so all of the gunners who hesitated would be shot out of the airlock into vacuum. If it's any consolation, everyone on the Death Star, including Tarkin, dies just a few days later. Next up, we have the Swamp Troopers, also informally known as Mud Troopers. This is pretty self-explanatory. These were specialized Imperial Army troopers, and by specialized I mean they have some basic waterproof clothing that makes their stay in the swamp a little less terrible. Now, generally speaking, joining the Imperial Army is a pretty good idea. Chances are you won't be deployed to the front of any crazy operation. That's a Stormtrooper's job. You'll most likely be garrisoned somewhere safe, and that's because Imperial Army troopers were just not very well equipped or trained. They were usually only good for fighting from a fixed position, and so when the 224th Imperial Armored Division was forced to fight on Mimban, it was really poorly equipped for the job. In the ensuing battle, the 224th would suffer huge casualties, morale issues, and lose a good portion of its motor pool to deep mud. If you're going to fight in a terrible trench warfare situation, you should surround yourself with capable people, not deserters and criminal scum. Scout troopers, otherwise known as biker scouts, are supposed to be elite specialized units attached to larger formations of stormtroopers. They are supposed to be very adept at a wide range of skills, including reconnaissance, bike patrol, and marksmanship. Oh, and they were also supposed to know how to fight with an electro baton in case they run into a Jedi. This is probably one of the quickest ways to lose your limbs. Mind you, all of the missions done by a scout trooper are usually carried out by lone troopers or teams of 2. The fact that the scout troopers wear all white makes them stand out in almost every condition outside of snow. This makes concealment almost impossible, and you're also not allowed to take off your helmet or armor while in active duty, and that's because the ISB most likely is monitoring your head comms. On top of that, the armor you are wearing is just as rigid and clumsy as what the stormtroopers wear, except for the fact that it is made out of a lighter and thinner material, so it offers less protection. And lastly, you have to depend on speeder bikes for transportation. They have no armor as well, and they're extremely fast and fragile and prone to spinning out of control at breakneck speeds. It's not an easy job. You're going way too fast, you're not dressed right, and everyone's going to see you, and you're most likely going to be outnumbered. Sounds terrible. The Imperial AT-AT driver is in control of one of the most terrifying ground weapons available in the Empire's arsenal. This behemoth walker was over 22 meters in height and well shielded and armored against most small arms weapons. These machines were multifaceted. They could deploy entire squads of stormtroopers, serve as direct fire support, or as an observation post, and generally did a good job at demoralizing the enemy when it appeared on the battlefield. The only problem was the ungainly configuration this walker was built in. It's far too high, far too slow, and far too large of a target to be effective for any kind of military action. For instance, when the rebels at the Battle of Hoth couldn't penetrate the armor of the AT-AT, they simply tripped it up with some snow speeders equipped with tow cables. And when you fall from 22 meters in height, you hit the ground at almost 50 miles per hour, which can really mess up your day. To make matters worse, Imperial Walker doctrine is all over the place. Oftentimes we see AT-ATs deployed without any mechanized infantry support, leaving them vulnerable to all sorts of rebel shenanigans. To be selected as a TIE Fighter pilot, one has to graduate at the top of their class coming out of the Imperial Academy. They then have to compete and fight their way towards the top of their class at flight school. And even then, only 10% of those who apply ever become TIE Fighter pilots. Not only because it is a competitive position, but because the training is just so grueling and the chances of death are quite high because it's the Empire. This training is not just physical and psychological, there's actually a lot of indoctrination that has to be done as well. The TIE Fighter pilots, just like the Stormtroopers, were heavily bombarded with Imperial propaganda, and they were stripped of their names and instead assigned identification numbers. And unlike Rebels, TIE Fighters usually didn't have their own ship, they were just given one out of the rotation. There's no connection usually between the pilot and the ship they're piloting, and that is, again, because the Empire wants to make everything just numbers on a stat sheet that can be easily cranked through the bureaucratic machine. And so the individual here really does not matter at all, and you can really see this when you take a closer look at TIE Fighter design. These TIE Fighters were a wonder of mass production, smart engineering, and low maintenance, but their minimalistic design lacked features that would be standard on most other fighters. The TIE doesn't have any shields, the standard variant lacks heavy munitions, it also doesn't have life support, so you actually have to wear a vac suit while flying, and lastly, these fighters don't even have a hyperdrive, and so if you don't make it back to the hangar during a battle, you might just be left behind. I personally never understood why the Empire spent so much time training these TIE Fighter pilots to be the best in the galaxy, and then they just kind of dump them into these disposable short-range interceptors. It makes no sense. I almost forgot some very crucial members of the Death Star Super Laser Gunner Squad, and that is the poor bastards who have to stand in the tunnel where the laser is actually being fired out of. These guys are gunners and technicians as well, but they seem to get exposed directly to the dangerous radiation coming out of the super weapon. There's zero protective clothing, no shields. I'm not really sure why they're even standing there in the first place. What I do know is that they'll probably suffer from minor radiation burns at first, but their insides are basically cooked by this point. Luckily, the technology in Star Wars is probably very advanced. I imagine a nice dip in a Bacta tank will solve a lot of that damage. The question though is how often do these poor bastards have to get like anti-radiation treatments in order to continue serving? They could have just built a shield. After the Battle of Yavin, Darth Vader would eventually be assigned a personal fleet known as the Death Squadron. The fleet was comprised of several Star Destroyers, including Vader's former flagship, the Devastator. The new flagship for the ship was an Executor-class Star Dreadnought, and that's where Darth Vader would take his command. Now, in general, serving on board a ship as either regular crew or bridge crew is preferable compared to something a bit more dangerous like flying inside of a TIE fighter, but if you serve beneath Darth Vader, anything could basically happen. This guy had some legendary anger issues. First of all, Darth Vader is accountable to no one except maybe Emperor Palpatine. He can basically do whatever he wants, including just murdering everyone in front of him. He also wasn't above using his own troopers as meat shields for incoming fire. And he definitely didn't suffer fools who delayed his military operations. Admiral Kendall Ozzel had been coasting along in a command position since the Republic era, and he was never really all that competent, and oftentimes rushed headfirst into situations, endangering his men and his forces. During the Battle of Hoth, his aggression caused the Empire to lose its element of surprise, and he's choked to death as a result. This was not the first, nor would it be the last time that Darth Vader would choke an Imperial officer to death. I mean, it's just not a good idea to serve underneath the Sith because they're very impatient, and they have really unrealistic expectations out of their minions. So there you have it, guys. Those are 7 jobs that I believe are amongst the worst in the entire Imperial military. I would suggest you guys avoid them at all costs. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,